Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and joining us in the studio is our ace reporter and special guest with the Marc Z moment. It's Marc Z of Marc Z Legal Staffing. Marc, good to see you.
John, great to see you. Great to be here.
Always a pleasure. You're going to bring us something topical for people to think about. What's that today?
Well, I thought we would talk about the use of virtual platforms post returning to the office. And when I say returning to the office, as you know, John, I think it's 85 to 90% of people right now outside of retail and restaurants and retail-related industries are working from home. And a small segment of the population is going into work, but not full-time. So it's a huge industry too, as companies assess what they want to do. And one of the areas are, how are we going to use virtual technology? Well, and is it here to stay? And the answer is yes. Zoom and GoToMeeting and Join Me and
HD Meeting and all the platforms.
And right, GoToMeeting and Cisco, those are all platforms that will continue, and they will continue to be used in different ways. And that's something that firms are saying we're not going to get rid of. And how are they going to use them, and what way are they going to use them? So the answer is, like you and I were talking about, you had a great example before we had this talk, was that you had a client that everybody was on their site and they joined a Zoom call with you who was working on Zoom. And that's what a lot of employers are thinking for meetings. And then not only that, networking in terms of presentations to organizations that are farther away. Organizations, law firms, and companies are saying, we can use these virtual platforms now for these basic meetings where we would normally have traveled. Courts are going to be using continue to use the virtual platforms for maybe mediation, maybe introductory motions. So what that's going to do is it's going to save time in terms of pushing cases out. It's going to save time in terms of the bills for clients, and it's going to make things more efficient for attorneys.
So it's interesting because there's a certain efficiency to it, yet you lose that personal touch, you lose that ability. I talked to an attorney last week who said you sort of lose the ability to get the full body language, a number of the variables. So it's fascinating in terms of companies and firms looking at it as a sort of hybrid model, if you will. But I wonder, certainly efficiency and time and cost, if you don't have to spend an hour driving to a venue and you can jump on and jump off and jump to the next thing. But are we going to see a loss in terms of connectedness within those organizations and the culture? So there's a trade-off to anything, of course.
Well, I think the whole idea is to take this new way of thinking and integrate it with your past way of thinking that worked out well. So for example, one of the things, as you know, I mean, when you and I've had meetings in person before, I could see your body language, but they talk about gaze on the attention in terms of meetings. In terms of virtual meetings, I think they're talking about after 30 to 40 minutes, you lose the attention of the person. People are also, what are people doing while they're talking to you? In other meetings, as you know, in person meetings, we always had people that were doing certain things, particularly people you and I know very well. But that's another story. The point of it is you want to make sure you use the virtual platform more effectively now that you have the live platform. So
it really gives you the ability to It really gives you the ability to multitask, because I could be typing away and doing all types of things. I don't have to be looking at you. But
correct.
You raise an interesting point. So one of the things that I think I see people still struggling with in the context of a Zoom is, where am I looking? Am I looking at you? Am I looking at the camera? You think companies are going to get more savvy, if you will, at creating guidelines and practices around the use of platform technology for meetings and interactions? Because it seems to me over the course of the last year, 15 months, it's been a little bit of trial and error, the wild, wild west. Everybody does their own thing. Even something as simple as virtual backgrounds. Do we want company branding? Do we not want company branding? Do we use it for internal meetings? Do we use it for external meetings? It seems to me that there has not been anybody that I've encountered who's come up and said, "Hey, we need a standard here." Are you starting to see firms talk about we need standards? Whether it's how many days in the office, what types of meetings can be held virtually. Are you starting to see companies talk about that?
Yes. Companies, law firms, and all organizations are starting to develop a plan, because now there's the end in sight, or toward some kind of new normal that combines everything. Now that I think the target is April 19th, where everybody can now have a vaccine. So that's all a component for long-range planning and strategic planning. So first of all, the firms, the organizations, and the companies are developing committees to assess it. Maybe it's an informal committee, or talking amongst employees through surveys, or literally strategically bringing consultants to say, here's what you should do virtual meetings for. Here's what the rules should be in a virtual meeting, aka remote meeting, and here's what should be done in person. And then guidelines in terms of making it effective. What's interesting, I was reading an article that was put out by the Association of Legal Administrators. There was a Harvard law article, I mean, not a Harvard law, but it was on I think the Harvard Review. And they talked about even the 30 to 40 minutes when things continue to go in the virtual meetings, have somebody, one of the things that's been talked about, and you've been on these meetings like me, people dominate the conversation. People don't get a chance to talk, and people go on and on unfiltered. And so they talk about a court jester, so to speak, like they used to use with court jesters in the medieval times, when court jesters are obviously very, very funny, good sense of humor. But the other role that court jesters have that people don't know is they were able to nudge things in a fun way. So if somebody was talking too much, nudge them. Right, like too much or whatever, and make it fun to not hurt the person's feelings or have this negative reaction, but at the same time push them on. So they talk about, for example, on a virtual platform, start putting little emojis up, like to get to everybody, so that person would get the message in a nice way. But something to police in appointing somebody who's on the virtual platform that might enjoy and get a kick out of it. And actually, they talk about how this person could be somebody who normally tunes out, and now they'll tune in more because they've got a role.
They have a role and responsibility. No, it's interesting that you say that, because I think there's a lot of cases where you change the platform, yet the objective is the same, and suddenly all decorum and all rules go out the window. If your organization uses, like, for example, Robert's Rules of Order, why would you change that? Because it's a virtual platform. It's the same practices should be employed. But I think, as we've gotten into whatever this new normal is, I think people are like, well, we're reinventing. And there's not necessarily the need to reinvent in a lot of ways. If you had good, effective meetings before, you can do those same types of things, virtually. I'm fascinated by, the courts and things of that nature. I've heard from, various attorneys that they find, obviously very efficient, because things tend to be locked into times versus historically in a lot of matters. If you're on a docket, you're there at 2 o'clock and you could sit there for 3 hours until your case is heard. Whereas now they give you a 15-minute window and you better be there, type of thing. So I think, it's driving efficiency in some realms. But I think the real challenge is how companies use it and communicating. A big part of communicating. I've been in a couple of situations where there've been live meetings, face-to-face meetings, and 2 or 3 of the participants in a large group didn't show up because they thought it was virtual. And so, they're sort of, wow, I didn't know we were meeting in person. So, you get into situations like that where communication is key and making sure that the whole team is on the same page.
Correct. Communication is key, John. You have to set rules. You have to, now that you're right, now that we've had a year of what's tried and true and seeing what's effective, what's not effective, and what's efficient, there's nothing like in-person meetings. But in-person meetings come at a cost, and it's a cost balance. If it's something that's really, really important, then that should be addressed in person. And it's just like the difference between texting and having a conversation. You can text about laundry list or setting up meetings or setting up a phone call, but there's nothing like an in-person conversation. Now, unfortunately, during the last year, a lot of in-person conversations have had to be by Zoom. And in the interviewing, as we've talked about, in the interviewing world, that the Zooms have, the Zoom, the other GoToMeeting, the other virtual platforms, those have been used effectively. I'll tell you what's interesting. I was at a Boston Bar Association event recently. They had speed networking for employment, and then they had virtual tables that people would be at. It's really interesting what technology does. Technology does a lot of wonderful things, but when you come to in-person, there's some things that should be in person, and there's some things that should be done remotely, virtually, for efficiency's sake.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you note, I've noticed an uptick in advertising, television advertising in particular, from a number of these platform providers. I hadn't seen a Cisco commercial in a long time. I've seen some recently, you know, for example, talking about their virtual platforms, et cetera. So I think it's here to stay. And companies better get it right, organizations better get it right. Marc Z, always bringing us topical information and interesting stuff, our reporter from the field. Why don't you tell people how to get in touch with you, Marc, if they want to talk further?
Thanks, John. Well, first of all, just Google Marc Z, M-A-R-C, and the letter Z, and we'll come up, or marczlegal.com, M-A-R-C-Z-L-E-G-A-L.com, or 617-338-1300.
Going to say, you're probably up there in the Google rankings with Gonzaga. Where is G? And Gonzaga comes up. It's just like Marc Z. You know, type in the Z and there you are.
Well, we try. We're doing our best.
Excellent. This has been a Marc Z moment on Radio Entrepreneurs, and we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.